All Tomorrows, a billion-year chronicle of the myriad species and mixed fortunes of man. Will your descendants have organs that each have their own sentience that they can mix and match like Mr. Potato Heads? Or will they be slimy, arm-sized, vor enthusiast earthworms? What ungodly force could transform human beings into this? And why do SpaceX interns keep going missing? Find out this time on Playing God, but just for fun. This all started when humanity began to colonize Mars over a few centuries. They got water from comets to make oceans, sent microbes to create a habitable atmosphere, and then sent genetically modified plants and animals to create an ecosystem. After it was transformed, the first steps on Mars were not taken by some poor intern that Elon crammed into a suit and threw haphazardly at the big red dot, but rather by barefoot children on lush green grass. The people of Mars became quite different from those of Earth. Low gravity made them tall and lanky like Napoleon Dynamite, and they basically became a different species. They coexisted peacefully for hundreds of years, but then they didn't. They got butthurt with each other and had a big, tedious, systematic war using drones programmed with an AI almost as cutthroat as the YouTube algorithm. There were no extraordinary Star Wars-esque battles, billions died in the war, and humans almost went extinct without a single cool space battle story to its name. To make that not happen again, the two planet survivors came together and genetically engineered the Star People, made to be better, smarter, and to adapt to alien ecosystems. The Star Folk created machines to terraform other worlds and then germinate them with the genetic material for people. Many humans fell in love with the machines that created them. I mean, look, you're the first generations of humans on this big rock ever, and you're telling me not to fall in love with robot parent God. The humans that planned this sound like they never met humans. The colonies that survived thrived and colonized the galaxy. As they explored space, they found some alien creatures, but didn't find any intelligent life. They began to wonder if they were alone. Really original thing to wonder about, guys. Glad we used all those fetal stem cells to make that brain you're putting to great use. After wondering for a while, they got their answer in the form of intense genetic alteration body horror. Enter the Q, a strange alien race with a fanatical religious devotion to remaking the universe with genetic modifications. If you're wondering if this is the same Q from the radicalized 4chan cult, that's a stupid question. Of course it is. The Q manipulated the genes of the Star People to change them into a variety of wacky, wild, and grotesque forms. They changed humanity into pets, tools, and wild animals, stunting most of their brains more effectively than Facebook confirmation bias groups. The Q ruled the galactic dinner table at the head big man chair for 40 million years, and then they went to go get a pack of solar smokes and never came back. Without their overbearing cosmological abusive parents keeping them frozen in their current state of development, some of them regained their cognizance or even societal structures. Without further ado, let's take a look at some of these horribly scarred children that Quaalude left behind. These are the Lopsiders, Cronenberg pancake people that were created to live in an incredibly high-gravity world. You know that fish from SpongeBob and also from real life? So it's that, but a person. The Lopsiders developed society and figured out spaceflight to escape their world's morbidly obese gravity. Like a girl in a high school drama written by men, they were worried that on other worlds they would be made fun of for being too flat. To cope with their insecurity, the Lopsiders genetically engineered the asymmetric people so that they can function on other worlds, and then the asymmetric people turned right around and systematically eliminated all of the Lopsiders. These are the Temptors. The females are strange fleshy cones that stick out of the ground like phallic meat plants, and the males are tiny simps who do everything for the girls in exchange for sometimes being allowed to slither into the mating tube. Whoops, they exploded. These are the worms. Blind human earthworms around the length of an arm. They have the amount of intelligence you'd expect from a worm, so if they run into each other, it's a 50-50 shot whether they eat the other one or smash. After millions of years of wriggling through the mud to find food mates, the worms eventually regained sentience and evolved into the snake people. The snake people had vast cities and tunnels sprawling through the underground of their planet. They liked to listen to literature and music played through vibrations in the ground, and they manipulated tools using hand-like appendages at the end of their tail. You know what else they're using that ham for? Maybe. Unless, like, they lay eggs or some shit. These are the mantelopes, and they're singing memory retainers. They were smart and remembered what happened to them, so they made an entire sad boy culture and wandered around singing sad songs. The thing is, they became dumb fairly quickly because a smooth-brained mantelope that's happy would survive much better than a wrinkle-brained mantelope that's sad if the only requirement is eat grass. These are the colonials. They're basically a living sheet of flesh bricks with eyes and a strange slit orifice. They resisted the Q, and the Q did not like that, so they left them with their sentience and made them live off of Q waste products. Over millions of years, the colonials evolved into separate colonies and competed for the title of best hive of flesh bricks by killing each other. The most successful of these colonies became the modular people, tower bionicles of living tendrily flesh giblets that they mix and match like those weird pendants when crocs were a thing. Every little fleshy croc pendant has its own function, like a cell in a body. Imagine if all of your organs had their own sentience and you could pull them out and swap them with your friends. That is how the modular people do. These are the swimmers. It's basically a blubbery human dolphin. The swimmers eventually evolved into the tool breeders. They couldn't make fire, so instead they used selective breeding to create animals that could serve purposes that we would typically use technology for. They built entire cities out of organic life. Massive heart-like animals pumped fluid through a vascular network to feed the tool breeders' bioluminescent living shell homes and brothels. In the tool breeders' world, instead of using a gat to rob a pharmacy for fentanyl, the citizens would use a living mollusk that fires teeth to rob a hive of recreational sea squirts. These are the spacers. They escaped the Q by living in asteroids. They move around by farting at extreme velocities with a pressurized digestive system. The spacers became the Asteromorphs, which look like aliens but with spindly, finger-like appendages so long that they could go up a traditional human butt and come out the mouth. Their brains expanded in the weightlessness of space, and they developed hyperintelligence compared to most other human species. They were fine with staying in space away from the dirty dirt creatures on their dirty dirt balls, but after a series of disasters that required them to look after their insignificant duller human relatives, lest they light the galactic house on fire again, they created these versions of themselves, the terrestrials, and they watched over and protected other human species unless they were corrupt and abused them, which also happened. These are the hedonists. They're quite small-brained and lived in paradise, constantly boinking each other and shoveling bacterial juice into their feeding holes as the Q's lapdog. Then the Q abandoned their lapdog in the space box on the side of the galactic highway. Most of the hedonists died on the side of the proverbial highway, but one group didn't, and they got sentient and started doing things other than mukbanging and regular banging. They still had this hedonism in the genes though, and this stayed prevalent in their society. But now this was experienced by conscious beings, known as the satyriacs. The post-human species made contact with each other over vast distances to establish an alliance of species. They found out about the Q and were wary of being horrifically Cronenberged for a second time. Two human species didn't join this alliance, one called the Bug-Facers and one called the Ruin Hunters. The Bug-Facers were a species once known as the Insectophagi. They fed on insects using their long and strangely suggestive tongues. Over millions of itchy years of bug bites, their faces hardened so as to protect from the incessant chomps of their prey. They were soon attacked by an unknown alien race, which instilled a lot of xenophobia into their society. The Ruin Hunters didn't really have an excuse. They were just kind of awful for reasons I'm about to go into. The Ruin Hunters were still biologically dunked on by the Q, but because the Q was sloppy when it was destroying the tech, the Ruin Hunters still had access to some of the Star People's technological marvels. This allowed their society to advance technologically without needing to advance socially, culturally, or likely for the average citizen, intellectually. So basically, imagine if you went back in time and got the most violent, superstitious, mentally incapacitated caveman you could find and gave him an automatic weapon, an iPhone, and a car, and just let him loose on the street. So it's that, but that person is everyone in society. Because of this, they had massive worldwide nuclear wars and almost destroyed the entire planet. Evidently, they were completely insane, and the sustained trauma and radiation over generations probably didn't help. The weird Squidward-faced people thought they were the only ones worthy of being an ancestor to the Star People. They eventually ditched their flabby biological forms and uploaded those same undeveloped, scarred, irradiated brains inside of flying metal Orbeez that could manipulate their surroundings with gravity fields. Unsurprisingly, they went full space Stalin almost immediately and began to eliminate all other human life. The Gravitals weren't described as hating other humans, they just saw them as we would an ant. I don't understand this comparison. I get that some people wouldn't think twice about crushing an ant, but people wouldn't travel the entire Earth to murder every ant in existence. That to me sounds like hate, or at least some sort of strange obsession with murder. murder. Almost all of the awe-inspiring strange amalgams of flesh that we talked about last time were wiped out in one fell swoop. For some inexplicable reason, they kept the bug facers alive as material for genetic experiments. Oh, how heart distorting. The Gravitals twisted them into the subjects, distorting a living being into any form on a whim. Remember the ad campaign There's an App for That? Made to show that any task, no matter how insignificant, had an app designated solely to it. In the Gravital Society, it's like that, but with an unconsenting conscious being. Imagine that for $1, you could go up to a flesh vending machine and genetically engineer a living creature to follow your friend around and screech whatever meme song is trending at unbearable volumes, only to put said animal down and genetically engineer a new one when a different meme becomes popular 4 days later. That is how the Gravitals do. The Gravitals made entire ecosystems out of humans basically just for fun and out of boredom. Like that kid Sid from the Toy Story. After they got bored with their living thinking toys, they ripped the same biological materials apart and slapped them back together in a new form they hadn't seen yet. Some Gravitals branched off into a new sect of thought and thought all life should be respected, so they created humans that could think and exist on their own. Some Gravitals fell in love with their humans, having a relationship with them like a benevolent god, and that's it. In order to avoid the societal problems between the two sects, the Gravitals did what anyone would do trying to avoid their problems. Find an external problem to distract yourself and deny that you ever had the other one in the first place. The Gravitals went to war with the Asteromorphs. This lasted for millions of years, doing unprecedented damage to the galaxy, but the Asteromorphs were the victor. They took the subjects and created worlds for them to live in. On these worlds, they placed the terrestrials to watch over humans, to make sure no one decided to do a galactic genocide again. These fleshy spider fetuses were usually pretty good guidance for the new humans, but sometimes they weren't. Likely on average, it just raised the bar up from immediately killing them, but hey, progress is progress. They didn't actually completely get rid of the Gravitals because it's pretty useful to have gravity robots around. To fix the whole mass killing part of them, they just kinda ironed their brains to smooth the wrinkles out. Think about it. If all toasters one day gained sentience and they said they wanted to kill humanity, would you A, get rid of toasters and never use them again, or B, just lobotomize them so you can enjoy your breakfast? They used the Gravitals as laborers in the galactic equivalent of coal mines. They also got new wiggly nanobot bodies. They eventually became citizens but were often discriminated against on account of the whole trying to kill everyone thing. Okay, so that's the history of the Asteromorph Gravital War, and now I'm gonna go through a bunch of humans that I haven't covered yet. If you don't see your favorite, write me a comment about it, and if enough people ask for it, I'll make a part 3 after man after man. These are the blind folk. They're mice people that live underground and have no eyes. Chuck E. Cheese has smooth, flat skin where its eyes should be, and I hate it. Whoops, they're crushed. These are the hand flappers, and if I uncensor that, the robots say I don't eat this week, but that doesn't matter because they're dead. This is a human parasite on a human host. They evolved into a symbiotic relationship where the former parasite controlled the host from designated parasite roost on top of their heads, calling themselves the symbiotes. These are human predators and they're human prey. Basically, human-animal planet. The predators evolved into the killer folk with a society revolving around violence, and the prey continued just to be eaten and farmed. These are the lizard herders, and they got lobotomized by the Q. The lizards evolved into Saurosapiens, a species of human-like lizard folk, and they selectively bred humans into pets and livestock animals. These are the bone crushers. They communicated by pooping on each other and survived off rotten meat until they didn't, then they starved. These are the striders. They're so tall and lanky that they can't fall over without shattering all of their paper-like bones, and they got bodied by giant chicken monsters. These are the sail people. They're basically living sailboats with long wiggly tongues to snag fishies and shove them into their face holes. These are the Pterosapiens. They're smart in their fly, but their bodies break down quickly due to the pressure of flight, and they only live like 20 years. These are the Titans, and that they were at some point kind of smart, and they have a face dong, and this one guy got sad that I didn't include them last time. And now all humans are extinct forever, the end. Eventually, humans went on to meet another friendly alien species that was like a snake that vomits up half a lizard, and then they went extinct or ascended to a higher state of being, and then they were written about by this thing, which is the book that we're reading right now. Got it? Good. One of the biggest questions that people have after reading this book is where did the Q go after playing Spore Creature Creator with humanity? Also, why did they leave? The Q thought of themselves as a species with a divine mission of genetic alteration, and when they saw humans colonizing the galaxy and bringing genetically engineered creatures from Earth, they were all like, hey, you stole my idea! My guess was that after the Q was certain that not a single ounce of humanity's flesh remained uncorrupted, they were either satisfied that humanity had been punished enough, or they thought they crippled humanity so much that there's no way that this species would haul its decrepit ass back out of the primordial ooze. Whatever the reason, they wandered off into space and abandoned their horrifically scarred children to die across different globes of dirt, likely to decimate some other species. To think that humanity was the first time that the Q had done this to another species shows a bit of your human hubris. I would like to point your attention to a yet unexplained section of the book. Back when humans were still the star people and not whatever the hell these things are, they discovered this fat dinosaur on another planet that was very similar to life on Earth. It was thought that it would feed on its planet using its large claws to disturb the sediment and graze, and native opportunistic life would look for any scraps left behind. What's strange is that the life on this planet has a copper-based skeletal system, 3 limbs, and a muscular system that operates hydrostatically. Later research then proved that the fat bird was related to a herbivorous dinosaur from Earth that went extinct before humanity. Now I ask you, what species do we know of that likes to move creatures around, mess with their DNA a bit, and drop them off on a random planet before blocking them on Snap? Yeah, that's our guy. While the Tomorrow's universe is as vast and unexplored as our own, with no known examples of this fuckery before the Q, there's a good chance that the Q was involved. So this tells us that we are not the first, but instead not even the first on Earth, in a long line of creatures that the Q ran a train on so hard that the babies came out beyond stunted. But this is still not the last we saw of the celestial stepdad that left behind the celestial family unit for a celestial exotic dancer. The author states that humanity did re-encounter and eventually defeat the Q, but it doesn't go into any detail why. I do have a theory though. It's said that when a society reaches a certain level of technology, to a less advanced being, this technology would be indistinguishable from magic, and the wielders of it would be indistinguishable from God. The Q punished humanity with then unfathomable technologies like a vengeful god, and when they left, all they did was give humanity time to catch up. By the time the Asteromorphs re-encountered the Q, they weren't the weird, awkward, easily genetically manipulated, submissive, and selectively breedable creatures they used to be. My guess is when the Q came back for round 2, they heavily underestimated the species that they once bodied so easily. The development of humanity along with the hubris of the Q was their own undoing.
It's our turn!
No, humanity, no!
I wonder how they treated the Q once they were subdued. They could easily give them a taste of their own medicine by turning them into a species of soft, hapless blob and leaving them on a planet of broken glass, and they very well might have. But maybe their humanity showed through and they showed some form of mercy. Whatever horrific things they did or didn't do to the Q aside, without the most dangerous, mentally unstable beings in the universe running around turning everyone into genetic Frankensteins, humanity was able to expand into unimaginable territories. They moved entire stars with artificial shells and maneuvered them to make the universe as filled with habitable areas as it could possibly be. They cracked the wormhole theory and they were able to cross unfathomable distances in seconds. They eventually even triumphed over time itself, extending their consciousness infinitely with what were called rejuvenating technologies. For a time, all men were gods. It was at this point that I believe humanity either ascended to a plane that current science is not capable of understanding, or they discovered something with such destructive potential that they destroyed themselves. With literally forever to develop technology, it's possible that they could discover an existence more worth exploring than a physical one. No one knows where humanity is today, or what form they might exist in. What the McFuck did you just say to me, you little blue bitch? Humanity lost. The story of the downfall and corruption of your species through amalgamation with artificial intelligence. What does it mean when you become the villains of your own former science fiction story? What would you do if you woke up from cryosleep only to find out that you're the only member of your species that hasn't merged with a murderous artificial intelligence that went full space stalling? What does it mean to lose your humanity? I lost my human. Can you please help me find them? Stay tuned to find out right now. Humanity Lost is the story of a man waking up in the distant future in a space vessel that kinda works, but mostly just a toaster oven. We know about this story because of one Callum Stephen Diggle. They're super talented, and I'll be leaving a link to their work in the description. Anyways, unbeknownst to this terrified kind of species orphan, this universe has been scarred by battle and travesty, and his robotic great to the millionth power grandchildren are all to blame. With no context of the history of this universe, you, like this terrified pants-pissing man in the species space dystopian version of a ramshackle orphanage, might be asking yourself, Spaceyland can't be that bad, right? How many bad could universe be is really? Let's get into it. By the 26th century, humanity had done away with nation-states for the most part and existed under the United Earth Government. They effectively controlled the collective destiny of humankind. One group in charge of all the power? What could possibly go wrong? Under their rule, humanity populated every major celestial body in our solar system, also 2 extrasolar planets. The seat of the UE governance was Earth's moon, and the moon became the most populated body in the solar system and therefore the center of human civilization. Most people live within the vast terraformed environments of the lava tubes. Humanity then went on to establish colonies in 2 alien star systems and sent automated probes to 13 others. They only found one with life, a planet by the name of Chiron, home of the Chantari, the first evidence of extraterrestrial life, and it was intelligent. Human-Chantari relations were pretty shit, with the Chantari being generally less advanced and intelligent than the humans. Being mean to less advanced beings that can't defend themselves? That doesn't sound like humanity at all. This led to the oppression and subjugation of the Chantari people. There were revolts, terror attacks, and even wars waged against the humans by the various nations of the Chantari. Humans, as they do, meddled with internal politics and pitted Chantari against Chantari, keeping them down under the thumb of the UE. Space Imperialism 101. And here I was, thinking you humans learn nothing from these videos. I don't usually say this, but I'm proud of you guys. This extraterrestrial Heart of Darkness level bullshit attracted the attention of a previously unknown alien alliance known as the Conglomerate. It was composed of various species across the universe, but we'll get to this wacky cast of assorted characters in a minute. The Conglomerate offered humanity an ultimatum because of their spacism. Either they join the alien UN, or the alien UN would strap them to a table and shit down their throat, and not in the fun way. Now, if you were humanity and you had just imposed space imperialism onto the slow kid of the universe, would you A, go to war with a semblance of alien races whom you just discovered and have no idea what they're capable of, or B, congratulations, if you chose A, you're correct! Humanity got popped so hard that they had to fly around the universe picking up their teeth with broken fingers. In their desperation, the humans decided to activate the evil science fiction AI toaster to help them win the war. It worked for a second, and humans weren't farmed by an AI for the purpose of a malevolent singularity. But then, not that happened. They weren't humans anymore, just avatars for their machine god. It began calling itself Elon Musk, the All-Mother, and so her new empire would furthermore be known as Twitter, the Imperium. After putting its fingers back together and popping its teeth back into place with the help of robots, humanity reached down the conglomerate's throat, grabbed the bottom of their stomach lining, and turned them fucking inside out. Every world they took was transformed into a biomechanical factory known as a womb world, spewing out more Imperium troops and ships to continue the Imperium's expansion. For the first time ever, the conglomerate were backed into a corner. They made allies with everyone they could. Refugee aliens whose homes were now womb worlds like the Bow and Virei, old enemies like the Calaxans and Gord, and even Meta. This is where the Humanity Lost comic book series begins. With that, let's take a look at the species of the universe that live alongside humans and Chantari. These are the Virei. Some people think that a Virei is what happens when a mommy whitetail buck and a daddy long furby and also somehow that worm from Dune love each other very much. But they're actually refugee aliens from a really cold swampy planet. A pervasive form of fauna can be found all across this region. This planet's analog of a tree. These alien trees intertwine to form elevated platforms in which the Virei like to do various activities. The Virei's pole-like toes allowed them to keep themselves elevated above the water level of the swamp, but also to hang from the tall flora like sloths do on Earth. They're covered in a layer of fur everywhere, except for its weird chicken feet and hands. I know these things are sentient, but they still look like they taste pretty good, real talk. The Breamhemians evolved on the high-gravity, low-atmosphere world of Wimrig. This world is very close to the star, but it has low atmospheric pressure, so it leads to very warm days and freezing nights. These coconut crab people developed through mostly subterranean routes, creating entire cities underground. Their structures and technologies had to be extremely tough because of their host planet's high gravity and regular tectonic activity. Thus, they developed their manufacturing abilities to that of someone with an advanced engineering degree but also no bit. Asteromporphs. They are stocky creatures with rigid skin, other than their soft, flappy face doodles. The Bremhemians were never able to break orbit despite their highly technological global civilization and going great with melted butter. Their gravity well was their worst enemy, but this made the conglomerate their best friend. The conglomerate helped to build the infrastructure to get the Bremhemian people into space, and the Bremhemians gladly joined their alliance as a member species. They now mostly manufacture weaponry and warships. You mess with a crabbo, you get the stabo. The Gourd. Okay, I'm sorry. I know I say this a lot. Like, a lot. And sometimes it's a reach, but come on. I'm just saying what everyone is thinking. The Gourd are not one species, but two. The product of perfect symbiosis between two species resulting in a single sentient hive-like entity. The fleshlight-like central plant-like core of a Gourd works as a hive for the smaller drones, which live, breed, and die around the Gourd. It provides sustenance and guidance through complicated pings of information, which the drones are perfectly adapted to understand, serve, and reply to. The drones act as the eyes and hands of the Gourdian central structure. They ping visual information back to the Gourd to provide situational awareness, and also allow the Gourd to manipulate objects around them. Through these means, the Gourd develop their extremely advanced civilization. Due to the exotic nature of the Gourd, their language and culture is practically indecipherable to other species of the galaxy. Understandably, if you tried to make friends with a sus-looking termite hill and then it vomited a bunch of insects to touch, smell, taste, and urinate on your face, you would not interpret this gesture as hello to you too. This makes sharing technology and complex information extremely difficult, and unfortunately led to several wars between the fleshlight ant colony people and the conglomerate. Despite this turbulent past, the Gourd are now a powerful ally in the fight against the Imperium. Now I'm gonna give the microphone to Thought Potato, who is totally not tied up in my basement. He's got an awesome channel where he checks out some similar topics to us. I'm really a huge fan of his speculative zoology and evolution sci-fi vids. You should totally check him out, and he's also not in my basement.
The Calaxans are a monolithic, tenacious, and unified race rallied around a common goal: conquest and expansion. You may be wondering why this thing is thick with 13 C's. Stop wondering that. You belong in jail. This elephant Cthulhu-looking man's evolved a muscular and squat physique due to the high gravity on their home planet. Their fat limbs are occupied by keeping their hulking body upright, but they have evolved powerful trunk-like appendages to manipulate their environment and an extremely strong neck to support them. These creatures are intelligent and communicate through vocal articulation and bioluminescence. Even though they are a warmongering species, they have a cultured, artistic part of their society as well. If humans weren't so focused on stapling microchips into their brains and turning every planet into a Lovecraftian uterus, they sound like they could be friends. This species is so good at blowing other people up, it even managed to resist annexation by the conglomerate, remaining a completely autonomous empire.
The Zepori are a now extinct species that only exist in the records of exobiology. All we have of them is one corpse-filled ship ruin. This is all theoretical, but like an Earth Dinosaur documentary, I'ma pretend like I know exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. The Zepori weren't capable of flapping their wings to fly, instead pumping hot air out of those two incredibly sussy tentacles. I speculate while making a wet fart sound of sorts, to hoist them into the air using the wings as a glider. This thing that looks like a huge duck penis had a baby with a tangled seaweed mass in the center of their torso is a limb that doubled both as a manipulator and as a nutrient hole. Above this appendage are the Zepori's flap-like eyes. From studying the ship's trajectory in flight computers, they discovered where the ship had come from. The conglomerate sent an expedition, but it was revealed that their home world had just become another Imperium fetus factory. The Tandrax are the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. Before the Imperium invasion, they lived in Dyson swarms around the various stars. But now that humanity is dicking things up, the Tandrax began turning their Dyson swarms into thrusters, which basically reflect the energy of the star out one small side to create thrust. They literally just fly around on the goddamn sun. The other oppressed species of the Milky Way began to set up stations and O'Neill cylinders orbiting these nomad stars as they passed through the galaxy, treating them as safe havens from the Imperium. The Tandrax are generally apathetic towards the Imperium and do little to combat their expansion. They're basically so advanced that they see every species around them as dumb space animals. Are you gonna go out of your way to murder every squirrel that wanders into your front yard? No. This one's kinda cute. He found pizza crust. At the same time, are you gonna go on a big pain in the ass crusade to get rid of every squirrel predator? Also no. This one's kinda cute. he found pizza crust. They allow what they call the rabble of the lower species to huddle around their nomadic stars to avoid extinction, but that's about all they do. The Tandrax have psionic and telekinetic abilities, allowing them to cloak their safe havens from the Imperium and read the naughty thoughts in your head, meatballs. The Tandrax's body is perfectly suited to the zero-G environment of space, with air jets all over their body and large web tentacles that it uses as air brakes. They've been a technological superpower for so long that they've evolved to the environment of microgravity, though many Tandrax have done away with their physical bodies altogether and have opted to transcend into a futuristic simulated existence. The Volusian blade dancers are a species whose culture is one of honor and tradition. We don't get along very well. Their culture is a bloodthirsty one, in which they go by resolving almost any dispute through combat, so it doesn't matter that we don't get along very well. Every Volusian carries a sword with which they defend their honor throughout their life. Their sword will often signify wealth and class. Those in the upper stratum of the Volusian society carry extremely decorated blades that are often centuries old, whereas the poor often equip themselves with more practical blades. This sword fighting stuff is also used as a system of control, one which fools the masses into believing that anyone can rise to the upper echelons of society through proficiency with the blade. Many do, but they can only go so far. So basically, machete-wielding maniacs are this species' versions of rock stars, rappers, YouTubers, and all things that are equally impressive and sexy. This affair of honor is commonly referred to as blade dancing. Their lower body is unique in that they can swivel it on 360 degrees. This allows them to move in any direction they see fit with great speed, without having to turn their head. A Volusian exhibits extreme dexterity with their 2 frontal tentacles, which far exceeds the capability of any human. This is made possible by their 3 brains, 2 of which are dedicated entirely to their corresponding arm. Through these tentacles they also feed, using smaller retractable mouth-tipped extendable tentacles that makes for plentiful hypothetical sensual suctional genital spectacle. If you enjoyed this video, please support Callum Stephen Diggle's Patreon. He does great work and definitely deserves more recognition because his project is a really unique way of presenting speculative biology and sci-fi. I want to thank him for hitting me up and providing assets for the creation of this video. He was really fun to work with, and I can't wait to see what's coming next for his series. Also, huge thanks to our guest voice actor Thought Potato. They have a really interesting channel. We cover similar topics pretty often, so if you like my stuff, you probably like him, and you should definitely check him out. I also want to thank Hop for providing some awesome drawings of the species in the universe for this video. They do amazing spec bio artwork, and you should go check out all their thingies.
Man after man, will your descendants be pulsating swollen tumors who fashionably accessorize with new organs and severed limbs, or will they be large, ever-expanding, morbidly obese biological meat factories? Are humans still humans without their humanity? What does that even mean? And do I have to put my body in the aluminum foil box to get free blood opium? All this and more on In the Man. This all started slightly in the future on a dying Earth. Some of the humans of the future wanted to leave and find new worlds to colonize, but the problem was, they needed a labor force to gather materials. Casting ethics and morals to the side, these humans began to engineer new species of people for life in different environments. These people existed for the sole purpose of constructing a generation ship that they never got to go on. Without further ado, let's take a look at the new species whose entire existence was getting the short end of the stick. These are the vacuumorphs. Avocado-looking space turtles created from former humans to work in the zero-gravity vacuum of space. Genetic engineering, selective breeding, surgery, and other methods of haphazardly playing God went into the creation of this being. They had pressurized bodies to keep the vacuum from forcefully suctioning out all of their organs. This green meatball has a tough layer of outer skin, thick eyelids to prevent them from going blind due to solar radiation, and extra lungs it refills by going to the edge of the atmosphere. It also has a waste gas lung that it can use to propel itself through space. They can't talk seeing as how they're in a vacuum, so they communicate through uncanny valley Eskimo kisses with these whisker-like structures on their face. Because of the way their bodies are structured, they could never exist on the surface of Earth, as gravity would crush them like the balls of a guy who paid $500 to get them stomped on. Meet the aquamorphs. Frogfish people genetically engineered from regular humans that live in the waters of the world. They have flat, wide faces and large mouths. Despite their slim torsos, they have chins all the way down their torso like Honey Boo Boo's mom. They also have this neat little Wombology mermaid man tool belt. They were created to scour the waterways for useful building materials and contribute to the generation ship's progress. These two groups of unconsenting victims of eugenics worked hard to create the spaceships for their unfeeling, unmodified creators, who then took the ship and left without saying thank you. Flash forward 100 years, and many of the vanilla humans that didn't get on the ship now take on the form of extremely inbred, constantly drugged up vegetables in big metal boxes. These are the high tech. All this tech and they still couldn't come up with a better name. Either many or all of their organs failed, and to avoid the fear of non-existence, they kept themselves alive with complex machines. Understandably, when your organs can go obsolete like an iPhone, it's quite a stressful situation. But that's no problem if your aluminum foil sausage casing can put lots of Xanax in your blood. The only time they slide out of their ketamine refrigerator is when they want to clap cheeks. They both strap into the swings and slap their flabby meat piles together like a fleshy Newton's cradle. Because they for some reason have to be detached from their most vital organs for it, this is often fatal and rarely fruitful. These conscious toasters genetically engineered a ton of different dumber feral humans to replenish the holes in the ecosystem that humanity left by killing everything. These creatures eventually adapt and evolve to fill a wide variety of niches in the ecosystem, and they'll likely have a video all to themselves. Meanwhile, in the ocean, the aquamorphs got Apple updates from genetic engineers in the form of the aquatics. They would now have the grace of a beached whale on land. The sea is their home. They slowly evolved to begin to resemble uncanny valley seals, still with fully articulated human fingers for use in tickling me in my nightmares. The aquatics overpopulated the ocean, and because of this had a food crisis. They adapted and gained the ability to produce a gel substance to take water with them, allowing them to traverse on land and find more food. I bet it had a consistency somewhere between snail slime and snot. So just remember, if your skin is constantly moist to the touch and resembles a slime of sorts, in aquatic culture, you would be considered advanced. While we were looking at the creepy water people, the high-tech replaced their machine organs with lab-grown synthetic organs, calling themselves the tick. They came to resemble swollen flesh tumors with limbs sticking out haphazardly in every direction. In the tick society, you used the amount of limbs you had to accessorize. Not only that, but you could solve all of your medical problems just by slapping on new body parts. Alcoholism killed your liver? Get a new one and keep on chugging. Lung cancer? I got good news. Break out the cigars. You want a tail? I don't get it, but I'll still take your money. No matter how many organs they replaced, they couldn't avoid the disaster of Earth's magnetic pole switching, which for some reason the actual science doesn't think is legit, caused a whole bunch of natural disasters that bodied the ticks into non-existence. For a while, the many different species of wild human that the high-tech created were allowed to exist and evolve in the natural state of the world. That was until those vanilla humans that left 5 million years ago came back home looking notably less vanilla. This living leather gimp suit is known as a builder, and they're soon to be the only descendant of humans that isn't completely Cronenberged. For example, these are their mounts. When creating the mounts, the builders were basically like,
hey, getting around is kinda hard. We should get something like a car, or a plane, or a spaceship.
oh, you mean genetically engineer our friend to make him shaped kinda like a motorcycle, and then we can hook tubes into his head to control his brain, and ride around on his back like some sort of flying man horse? I meant more like a vehicle. Well, it's already done and you should have been more clear. So basically, they're flying around on their former species members and turning the remaining humans on Earth into niche goal abominations. This is the air changer. They're basically living air conditioners controlled by mechanical brains and are constantly altering the atmosphere to be more suitable for the new GIMP people.
We're just air conditioners. I mean, after all, we're just walking around on the planet, breathing, conditioning the air.
Alongside these monstrosities, the genetically engineered human food creatures. Basically, they made a big blob to make as much meat as possible and harvested it while the creature was still alive. You know a buffet carving section where they have a cut of meat and the guy is slicing off pieces for everyone? So it's like that, except a living, forever regenerating, morbidly obese man. If a creature inherited genetic memory from its ancestors, does that mean it will inevitably be scarred by the memory of its own inception? Now that we know the inevitable fate of humanity, let's take a look at all the humans that filled the niches left behind on Earth and what they were up to while the technologically advanced people were committing crimes against God. Among these human descendants were a variety of dwellers that inhabited different environments. The plains dweller was a large human creature that lived in savannas and subsisted on grass. It had curved fingernails like a scythe to help it gather foliage. From the eating hole, the grass would travel to its ruminating gut to undergo digestion, similar to how a cow eats. The plains dwellers evolved into the socials, and they made friends with another human species called the water seekers. The water seekers mostly died out due to the changing climate of their environment. The only members of this species that could survive were able to find water instinctively. The socials adopted their endangered cousins and cared for them in exchange for their water-seeking abilities. The socials did all the hunting and gathering, and because the water seekers didn't have to do anything, all their limbs and sensory organs became vestigial and shriveled up, leaving them looking like weird faceless potato babies. If a tribe of socials doesn't have enough water seekers, they'll attack another group and try to kidnap their seekers. Also, only one social female can mate and produce babies, and every male in the society mates with them until they can't push out babies anymore or die. Their strict social relationships soon developed into a strict societal structure. They were now known as the hivers. In hiver society, you were born with one job that you keep for your entire life. You're either a gatherer, a nurse, a warrior, or a queen. Are you not happy with the current state of upward mobility in our world? Be thankful that you're not the potato baby. This is the Ant-Man. Basically human anteaters. They have long wiggly fingers to stick inside insect mounds and other unspecified holes in hopes of slurping bugs off their fingernails. For all those people itching to eat it, I'm sorry to say that the meat isn't edible as it's filled with formic acid from the ants that make up its diet. Not that anybody's eaten that. That illustration is the first thing I've ever seen that looks thick in an uncanny valley kind of way, and I just hate it. Like a zit that's about to pop. Like if the plastic surgeon took a patient's words way too literally when she said perfectly round. Like for some reason the exact shape, size, and texture of the anthills that they stick their fingers into, and I just had an awful realization and you just had it with me. The woodland dwellers were some of the most adaptable of the new human species. They were generalist omnivores like many of our primates today. The high-tech thought of them as possibly the most human of all, living in harmony with nature. Some of the woodland dwellers evolved into the memory people. They retained genetic memories from their OG human ancestors and could use some of it to help with survival. I'm not sure about that. How does that even work? Because the parent can still gain memories after the child is born. So does every single genetic lifespan's memory cycle end at the soon-to-be generationally scarring moment of inception? Does that mean that every memory person has like an eons-long movie in their brain that's just every ancestor up until they nut to create the next ancestor? Please tell me in the comments that I'm misunderstanding what he means by genetic memories. I'm gonna stop digging for answers now because there's nothing in that vein that I would ever want to find. These are the vote people. Like the memory people, they retained skills from their ancestors and remembered how to do things like woodworking and metalworking. But they also remembered what happened to the species after we started doing those things and would immediately murder whoever did that. Basically an entire species of Amish cultists. The tundra dwellers were like migratory polar bear people in the snow. They have toenails that can function like ice picks to help them move around and get to foliage under the snow to eat. This creation is also responsible for this image, where most of you are probably getting that nostalgic feeling from. The tundra dwellers' offspring and the woodland dwellers' offspring became besties, and now the Yeti-looking guy carries around the smaller guy and the little guy hunts for food for both of them. You know what they say, sharing is caring. This allows the little guy to preserve their energy for hunting while the Yeti guy can focus on covering vast distances. In this new symbiotic relationship, they were called the symbionts. To any of you who are making a spec zoo project, don't call any two species in a symbiotic relationship a name stemming from symbiotic. Everyone, including this book, which I think might be one of, if not the first to do it, does it. Do something else. That same idea is about to be recycled less efficiently than a plastic bottle due to the spec zoo boom. Never thought this genre would get big enough to have tropes. The islanders were isolated on an island, no shit, with a very limited food supply. Because of this, like the modern Prius, they became smaller, more energy efficient, and ravenous, hyper-violent carnivores to sustain themselves. They devoured other larger species of humans like strange anthropomorphic land piranhas. Eventually, they shifted from eating a prey item immediately to slowly draining it over time, and evolved a parasitic relationship with a megafauna of host humans. They eventually acted like a human tick that slurped gallons of red vitality juice from the fat tumory monster man. Humanity diversified into basically every niche that would typically be occupied by another animal. For example, this is the fish eater. It's kinda like a monkey otter. Like an otter, it has a hydrophobic coat to help it glide through the water, but unlike an otter, it does not like to have relations with other dead members of its own species. Actually, I don't know that last part for sure, but I would hope not. It also has a brain adapted like an archerfish, so it could aim accurately when hunting, even with air-water light refraction. They also evolved into the tree dwellers, which are basically just sloth people. These are the desert runners. They have spiked ears like a Pomeranian for internal temperature control, and have humps of fat and water like a camel. I wonder what it would sound like if you slapped it. This thing is known as the sloth man. It had no competition or predators, so like the human ancestors of long ago, it decided to get as morbidly obese as it possibly could in order to take advantage of the situation. They kinda look like Snorlax people. This is the spike tooth, a predatory species of human that kinda looks like the end result of a caveman having a few too many fermented figs, waking up next to a saber-toothed tiger and waiting out a gestation period to see how it turns out. The Birrin, an intelligent hexapod alien species living in a society on the planet of chriirah. These sapient animals evolved alongside numerous otherworldly creatures to become the dominant life form on their planet, creating a civilization rivaling that of humanity in culture and technology. If you had retractable eye stalks like the Birrin, would you use them to do creepy and illegal things? Be honest, I'll know if you're lying to me. All this and more on In the Birrin. The Birrin are an alien species with an intelligence comparable to a human. We know about these creatures because of one artist, Alex Reis. They've done a great job documenting the species, and I'll be linking their work in the description. The Birrin have 6 limbs, 4 used for locomotion, and 2 used for manipulating their environment. The Birrin are around the size of a deer. They have 4 eye stalks capable of retracting into their head, and they respirate through openings near the eyes called spiracles. These are similar to the spiracles found on Earth animals such as arthropods, cartilaginous fish, and basement-dwelling toe sucklers. The mouths of the carnivorous Birrin open up into 4 distinct flappy doodles like that monster from Stranger Things and then every other movie. In the center of the mouth is a cephalopod-like beak, which the Birrin uses to rip out chunks of meat from whatever animal it decides to turn into nutrients. Whatever that mouth do, I don't want to know. The Birrin also sport a set of wings, but after rigorous scientific testing, we have determined that they are not for flight. Instead, they are used for communication and shedding heat like the sail of a Spinosaurus, or maybe that was inaccurate depending on the ideas of the scientists that are currently arguing about it. At some point, humans just got to accept they're never gonna get dinosaurs right. The Birrin reproduce by laying eggs. This is a Birrin egg, and inside is a baby Birrin. I am angry that I cannot pet it. Like many Earth species, baby Birrin are born much smaller than the adults, and are covered in a layer of fuzz like baby birds to protect them from parasites. The Birrin eggs rely on the adults to produce and switch out these protein caps on the eggs for sustenance. This relationship fosters familial bonds, and is imperative in the socialization and survival of the Birrin. The Birrin evolved from the common ancestor of many modern animals on chriirah, the basket worm, a now filter-feeding creature that lived in burrows and extended feeding tentacles outside to capture small organisms and bring them to its mouth. See, now that I've said that, we wait for someone in the comments to say they want to use it as a fleshlight. Even though this video is more about the Birrin and their biology, to get a sense of their life and why they evolved the way they did, we're also going to need to get a sense of the ecosystem around them. I'm going to flesh out the world a bit more with more animals from the same family tree. This is the pseudoraptor, a terrestrial predator closely related to the Birrin. One key difference is that the pseudoraptor uses 4 of its limbs for manipulation and walks bipedally. This 2-legged gait could allow for distance hunting similar to how humans track prey. This predator feeds on anything that it can find grazing the dry plains. It grasps the prey with its 4 sharp arms and then grips them to go for the kill. The giants are another species related to the Birrin, distinguished from their smaller cousins by their massive size and a cock to match. I'm not above a literal low-hanging fruit. Their intelligence is thought to be in between that of a parrot, which is actually quite intelligent, and a human. The Birrin and the giants have had conflicts before, but the giants are fairly live and let live. They even have an alliance at one point where they farm native bluestick plants together. Yeah, so a lot of the time, I don't even know what the fuck is behind me. I just make unceasing eye contact with the audience and guess with great confidence. Human-animal hybrids. What is a human-animal hybrid? Is this a human-animal hybrid? What about this? Have you heard that a team of scientists have created an embryo that was part human being, part monkey? This all started when an international team of researchers got their hands on some crab-eating macaque monkey embryos. They injected the monkey embryos with human pluripotent stem cells and allowed them to develop ex vivo, aka test tube baby style, for 19 days. The human cells were given a glowing label so that the scientists could track them. Upon the end of the experiment, 8% of the total embryonic cells in this monkey fetus were human. Fortunately for ethics nerds, but unfortunately for my potential Planet of the Apes documentary, the team did not allow the fetus to be born. If a monkey-human chimera were to be born, it would blur the lines between what is considered human and animal. This raises a lot of questions. Will we consider this a human, an animal, or something in between? If you made a cow with human skin and feet instead of hooves, would it be cannibalism to eat it? What % of this organism has to be human for it to be given human rights? Would something be more human if it had a human brain rather than just a human foot? What about a human-like face? Would I go to jail for giving a chipmunk a massive human penis? Realistically, this kind of experimentation would lead to entirely new fields of research. With all this comes new ethical conundrums, and most likely law changes. This particular experiment took place in a lab in China, so if we ever made a live one, we might not know about it for a while, seeing as how censorship laws there.
Nope, stop talking, go to jail.
The being they have created is known as a human-monkey chimera. Chimeras often do not survive for very long after creation, but some species are more effective at being chimeraized than others. For example, one previously successful chimera combination is rat and mouse. This raises a ton of moral issues, but if you discard all of those, the possible combinations could be endless. This is not the same as a hybrid animal. Whereas a chimera is a being that has cells from multiple different species, hybrids combine two sets of different species DNA to make genetic material for all of the cells. Like when a tiger meets a lion in a nightclub bathroom after taking 9 multicolored pills. Boom, one gestation period later, you got yourself a liger. Ever wonder if a human woman would sign up to have a human chimpanzee hybrid in her vaginus? Enter the proposed hybrid known as the human Z. The first recorded human who attempted to create a human Z via artificial insemination was Ilya Ivanovich Ivanovov in the 1920s. I'm sure someone has attempted to create a human chimp hybrid in the natural fashion, but most people probably wouldn't publicize that they did that. Ilya inseminated 3 female chimps with human sperm, but none of them became pregnant. He organized an additional experiment with human volunteers and non-human sperm, but his program was shut down before it could be carried out. Jump to 1977, and one J. Michael Bedford discovered that human sperm could penetrate the outer membranes of a gibbon egg. Don't ask me how he figured it out. I'm sure it was some scientific device, or like a turkey baster. I'm fine with literally anything, so long as it wasn't his dick. It has also been found that human sperm binds to gorilla oocytes with almost the same ease as to human ones. So, is this possible? Human beings share 95% of their DNA sequence with chimpanzees, and our other close relatives, the bonobo apes, are reportedly able to create hybrid offsprings with the chimps easily. It's a big maybe, so there's only one way to find out. Hypothetically, let's say someone had enough money to fund a laboratory capable of running these types of genetic experiments. If this same someone were to fund said laboratory and begin to attempt the creation of a human-ape hybrid, would the government attempt to intervene, and at what point? What countries would be the most forgiving of this behavior, and could the aforementioned individual get away with this in international waters? If the individual were to just drop said hypothetical human Z off in a random genetic laboratory with a collar that would say "Analyze my DNA," sit back with a beer and watch the chaos on the news, how do you think the world would react? Also, if you were to watch a hypothetical YouTube video outlining a scenario that may or may not violate international law, and it happens like 20 years down the road, would you snitch on that individual who made that video? Feel free to choose your words very carefully in the comments below. Fun prank idea: go to a sperm bank and switch around some of the human vials with chimpanzee.
Just keep pushing, honey.
Can I see my baby? She already paid, right? There's a ton of really cool science involving chimeras and hybrids, but I need some real evidence. I'm talking like a 6-year-old YouTube video of a Russian man injecting his spunk into a chicken egg to make several worm-like monstrosities. Not even joking. We're gonna go through some of the Russian homunculus series. Also, this series is really gross, so you know.
Trigger warning, vulnerability.
So basically, this guy injects his baby gravy into a pre-chicken, and then he just puts a band-aid on it and waits for a few weeks, and then he cracks it open, and out comes this thing. Yeah. This one is the best. I love that weird worm thing. Unfortunately, weird worm thing spat at vodka land science man's face, and then in a moment of pure unadulterated Russian rage, he obliterates his half-chicken son with a book that I failed to Google Translate because I don't have a Russian keyboard. After getting spit on, he's not making that same mistake again. He went full Chernobyl suit on us. He stepped up his game. He's doing a full homunculus mukbang up in here. Could you imagine a video collab where this guy works with like one of those food tubers and he cracks open a bunch of homunculi and the other guy just starts shoveling them into his mouth? Moving on. I love how he has his trusty pre-designated homunculus smashing book at the ready in this one. He will not be caught off guard again. Not again. Okay, he left this one alive and now he's keeping it kind of like an interesting beta fish. Honestly, pretty cool pet, 9 out of 10. It appears to have grown much bigger, and now it is undulating. It's beginning to take on a shape that somehow really looks a teeny bit like both types of human genitalia. That one has an eyeball. I'm not saying anyone owes anyone royalties. I just know we don't want to have to get the law involved. I don't know if those creatures you making have skeletons, but if they do, your closet's full of them. Things are getting a bit more advanced now. We have the baby of Amoeba and Patrick Starr hanging out with his best friend, a living fleshlight. Name a more iconic duo. I'll wait. And it appears that one of two things have begun to happen. Either the fleshlight is attempting to vor the eye starfish, or they have combined into one being. I will update you as the story develops. They do appear to be fusing as one being. Yeah, I don't think one is eating the other. I mean, all of these body parts are just terrifying and wrong to me, so it's anyone's guess. Wow, this is quite a dramatic change. It kinda looks like the Dumbo octopus, just a little bit. Oh, he's gonna probe it with the poking stick.
Homunculus, no enjoy the poking stick.
Okay, so you know how I just said that they were combining? Now I'm not so sure. Maybe Dr. Frankenstein's fleshlight really was just eating the other one? Either way, it appears to have foregone the head and instead just replaced it with an upward-facing anus. Quite an interesting evolutionary strategy. It appears to have developed teeth, kind of like one of those sea cucumbers that grow teeth in their anus. Do you know what I'm talking about? Probably not. Moving on. Oh my god, look at it. It just ate a raspberry. Nature is so beautiful sometimes. I mean, like, not right now. That's a disgusting abomination, but I don't know. Go outside. I don't know if I'm gonna have to censor that. Did it just poop, vomit, sneeze, or bust a nut? I'm not really sure if there's much of a difference if you really only have one hole for everything. Oh my god, is that a fish? Oh, it's dead. It's dead. I was expecting the homunculus to try to, like, eat it or something. I mean, like, other than everything that someone may object to morally or ethically here, at the very least, that's incredibly anticlimactic. The Teeming Universe, an extraterrestrial field guide. What would you do if you were dropped off in an alien swamp filled with scorpion salamander-looking creatures trying to liquefy and then slurp out your organs? At what point does a creature made out of a bunch of other symbiotic creatures become its own micro-ecosystem? And how long can a dope astrobiology project exist before the basement dwellers make NSFW versions of every single creature like all tomorrows? Find out this time on In the Teeming Universe. The Teeming Universe is a field guide to a myriad of extraterrestrial planets containing multitudes of strange alien species in the known universe. We know about these worlds because of one artist, Christian Cline. They're a great artist, and I'll be linking to their pages in the description. Without further ado, let's take a look at some of the worlds detailed in these pages. Welcome to the world of Hercelion. The scientific school of thought thinks this may be the result of a terrestrial planet, a gas giant, and a broken prophylactic. Halfway between the mass of Earth and Uranus, the large size of this planet has significant effects on the evolution and biology of the life forms that call this world home. Hercelion has a gravity of over double the obesity of Earth's and a thick, soupy atmosphere. The high atmospheric pressure in tandem with rampant volcanic activity has turned the surface into a hot, hellish environment almost as unlivable as New Jersey, with shallow oceans and limited biodiversity. The surface is sparsely populated by plants and small, flat, creeping animals that got Darwinian smushed by the intense gravity, but the true beauty of Hercelion can be seen in the skies. There are two main classes of life in this world: Aperticorolusians, the aforementioned hell beetles, and Supernatians, the inflatable doll balloony boys. The skies of Hercelion have atmospheric pressure, temperature, and light presence more similar to Earth's lower atmosphere than a dimension of torment. Because of the more favorable conditions, they can expand into many more interesting niches than is possible on the surface. As life evolved here much more recently than life on the lightless, decrepit surface, animals here have only recently developed eyes. Instead of using vision as the main sense like any respectable biological creature, many creatures use bioelectrical sensory organs to maneuver their environment as well. To stay buoyant, instead of a skeleton, these creatures have a cartilaginous endoskeleton and hydrogen sacs to stay afloat. The most significant example of a supernatian life form is the Oon. The Oon is described as a living hot air balloon the size of 3 blue whales sewn together. They look like they'd be super fun to jump on like trampolines, but it also looks like it'd be too easy to fall to your death to a hell dimension. These bloodless, brainless, wiggly masses are the largest creatures to inhabit Hercelion. kameleon. They flow with the wind in packs of 2 to 5 and occasionally draw in air to create more hydrogen and specialized organs to float. Even though it has no brain, it has 2 rudimentary eye stalks that are just barely usable enough to detect movement, and bioelectrical organs underneath its bunghole area to detect large organisms in its dummy thick blind spot. Oons are very susceptible to damage from storms, turbulences, and coke overdoses, but non-lethal injuries will heal over time. Oons are actually not just one organism, but instead closer to a flying symbiotic ecosystem in itself. A plethora of little creatures make the oon its home. So just remember, if someone makes fun of you for constantly being covered in small insects, you can tell them that in oon customs, you're a stud. Some creatures act as pollinators, some make food, some protect it from predators, some maintain and repair the oon's body, some eat excess algae and its poops, and some eat the ones that eat its poops. Oons reproduce with internally stored eggs and something terrifying called aerial sperm. Newborn oons are already ready to float. Like when human moms poop on the babies when giving birth to them to give them bacteria, actually true, look it up. Baby oons get symbiotic species from their parents. The only time an oon will ever go to the surface of the planet is when they suffer a lethal injury, sometimes from a pack of hunting predators known as the speldos. Speldos are around the size of a bus at 40 feet. They are fierce pack hunters that hunt oons and other smaller Hercelion animals. While they don't have jaws, they do have thousands of tiny teeth that they can use to rip chunks of flesh away from their prey by ramming into them headfirst at full speed like all those old football players. I mean, I didn't watch the second half of any of their documentaries, but from the first part, it seems like it worked out great. They have 2 large wings that are actually made of 4 fused limbs, and 2 up front used for stabilization. When they attack the oon, thousands of protective oon mites from the oon ecosystem quickly swarm and engage to attempt to dissuade these predators by latching onto them and repeatedly scratching and biting them with their large beaks until they cease the attack. Shifting gears to a planet that's a little more similar to the human homeworld, let's check out Solis. Solis is a terrestrial planet around 70% the mass of Earth that lacks a moon. This lack of a special space rock to fake a landing for a significant societal landmark might not seem like a big deal, but moons are actually quite important for life on the surface of a planet. They act as stabilizers for the axial tilt of the planet, so we have stable seasonal temperature changes instead of one side freezing and one side burning like a microwave tin of Chef Boyardee. While it looks like our planet aesthetically, even the seasons on Solis are alien. There are 4 different weather zones. Days and nights can either be even on the rotation of the planet, or days and nights can last from weeks to months depending on the zone. Life on Solis originated before Earth, but because the environments of Solis are about as bipolar as Kanye, life is not nearly as diverse here. The first multicellular life came around 850 million years ago. Plants here use a slightly darker version of chlorophyll to get sun through the cloudy sky, and most of them hibernate and germinate during particular seasons to adjust to the strange environments on Solis. They never evolved with cellulose in their cell walls, rather using fibrose or chitin-like earth insects. My favorite plant on Solis is the carnivorous torproot, which, like some earth plants, supplements nutritional deficiencies in the area with live animals. Speaking of animals, for the most part, animals on Solis are near the ocean because those ecosystems are the most conducive to life on this planet. Many are entirely aquatic or amphibious, just over 10% are completely terrestrial. In addition, most animals have a fast metabolism and quick lifespan because the weather likes to murder everything routinely.
Die young, leave a pretty corpse, that's what I say.
You should say something else.
One of the largest and most fearsome animals on the planet is the xanthir, carnivorous amphibious predators that range in size between 2 to 8 feet. A quote from the field guide, they have a bulbous cephalon which features a tough oserkerite shell covering a brain casting, and this shell connects to several additional bony segments lining the rest of the body. Like most Discord users, there's also green and yellow moss that coats their bodies because they often stay still for a long time. Their eyes are unable to move in their sockets, and because of this, they can only look forward. Just like you, aside from the 2 times in their life they meet to mate, they are solitary creatures. Their saliva has a deadly toxin for incapacitating prey, and then like a spider, they slurp out all the juices like a blood and guts slurpee. Like amphibians, they respirate in part using their skin, so they need to be consistently moistened. During winter, they move much more slowly and become completely aquatic, and during mating season, the males and females will release smells, and like how when you put your nose up to their anus and deeply inhale, the males will follow the smell of the females to mate with them. Another interesting organism on Kraylon salices the Bahari. Even though I know it kind of looks like a plant, that is a dirty, dirty lie that your Earth brain has fed to you. It is in fact an animal. They will mimic plants to avoid predation and feed on smaller animals in the mud and foliage. But if that doesn't work, they will snap their arms down to spring themselves in the air and glide away before swimming to safely. Hunting these creatures are the Bahari flyers, who are small creatures with a 4-foot wingspan who slaughter the Bahari by slurping out their internal organs with digestive enzymes. Coming up tonight on Earthwatch at 11, the planet is still melting while everyone's ignoring it, and is Lil Pump one-upping Lil Uzi by replacing his brain entirely with diamonds? The Teeming Universe, an extraterrestrial field guide. What would you do if you were dropped off in an irradiated hellscape surrounded by carnivorous kites who wanted to bite perfect circular holes in you? Patrick, my boy, what have they done to you? Those machines that entirely occupy that otherwise uninhabited planet over there that used to have liquid water and are surrounded by fossils and thinking about expanding, should we be concerned? All this and more on In the Teeming Universe. Welcome to the world of Borold, a tidally locked super-Earth tightly orbiting a red dwarf star. It's just under 3 times the fatness of Earth, so it has a much higher gravity. Because this world is tidally locked, it has a light side and a dark side. Although there is an area in the middle that's the closest to what we could consider an Earth-like environment. Even though it has close to the same amount of water as Earth, a large portion of Borold's water is trapped in a thick layer of permafrost. Life on Borold usually has 2 infrared sensory receptors that take the form of cold, soulless black dots on their heads. They can see in the visible spectrum, but 70 to 100% of what they can sense is in the infrared spectrum. The red dwarf often releases deadly solar flares, and many of these creatures are adapted to detect these flares to hide from them. Is a little baby afraid of a little radiation? Say what you want about humans, at least they still buy the cancer sticks. This is the Borold star. It looks like Patrick's star was dipped in a vat of acid just enough to remove the top layer of skin and any lovable or recognizable features. So basically just Patrick after the reboots. It can grow up to 30 feet long and spends its days sliding around on the surface with thousands of tiny muscular feet looking for small animals to digest. Like most life on Borold, this creature has 7 limbs. Although on the Borold star, the 7th limb is a serrated egg arm that is only used to break out of the egg it hatched from. Unlike humans, the egg arm does not fall off after hatching. Although, like morbidly obese humans, Borold stars reproduce sexually by slowly sliding their flabby bodies over each other. They're hermaphrodites, so they both get pregnant. Everybody wins, or loses, depending on how you look at it. Borold stars don't look after their young. Nymphs are aquatic and a lot more mobile, eating aquatic animals for a few months before going to the sedentary lifestyle of their parents. Staple folds in the Borold star diet include dead flesh, injured animals, and sometimes even Arby's. The star's metabolism is quite slow, and it's able to go 8 weeks without food. Riding the ever-present winds of Borolds are the Borold Kites. These are the Borold equivalent to vultures, flying carnivores that both actively hunt and scavenge dead creatures. Their 2 forward-facing receptors give them superior depth perception and focus, and all of their 7 limbs function in unison to allow them to fly like a kite. They have a wide jawless mouth and hundreds of tiny teeth for use in flesh mastication and extreme BDSM. They mostly feed on dead Borold stars until they're disturbed or full, and then they spread their wings and glide away on the wind. Another predator of the Borold star is the Borold saucer, which is kind of like a sarlacc pit. It waits until something crawls over it and shoots out 7 sharp iron spines, stabbing the victim and pulling it to the center to tear out and consume chunks of its flesh bit by bit. Unlike most of the worlds in this guide, the planet of Kraylon is seemingly devoid of life. Well, biological life, that is. Kraylon is a cold, roughly Earth-sized planet theorized to formerly have copious reserves of liquid water on the surface. It looks as if some unknown cataclysmic event turned the planet from lush to uninhabitable. Whatever happened, the way it ended left the world untenable for most biological life, and it left Kraylon feeling unwanted and very self-conscious about its body and personality like many people after their relationships. Many of the planets in Kraylon's system look as if they've been meticulously mined for resources by alien machines. Like most planets in this system, its surface is dotted with large carved holes, not craters, carved holes. The southern hemisphere is encompassed by a planet-wide ring that of course wouldn't have happened naturally. The only inhabitants of this planet are technological in nature, and there is no organic multicellular life on Kraylon. Much of Kraylon's lower surface is covered in machinery due to these mysterious entities. We've named these machines the Krail. They're
They're possibly millions of years old artificial intelligences that are far beyond human technological and intellectual advancement. No one knows who built them, but there is single-celled life and fossils on Crocin. So maybe either someone built them and they went off into space, or someone built them with loosely programmed guidelines and then gave it access to the internet, and then we had to stop watching the AI horror movie because Amoeba got too scared. The Crocin are preparing for mass expansion of their numbers, which sounds ominous as hell. If there was ever a thing to be worried about, it's this. They're creating millions of mining ships to harvest planets and moons for raw materials. Each planet in their solar system has been or is being mined out. Many areas on Crocin are devoted to solar power for mining as well, and at night it glows a brilliant blue. They're able to travel at superliminal speeds, aka above the speed of light, aka that one thing that even very smart wheelchair robot man, God rest his soul, maybe he shouldn't have tried so hard to disprove God says you can't do. So yeah, they're kind of a big deal. The largest Crocin machine in the Gravitalesque army is the Arch ship. 20-mile-long trapezoidal ships with the pointy end facing towards the planet. The tip beams out directions and signals for hundreds of thousands of drones on the surface. There are millions of these dotted along the planet. They're made out of something dubbed cralium, and while it's partially made out of materials known to man, it displays properties never before seen in a known substance. The material easily conducts heat, spontaneously changes opacity/reflectivity, magnetic charge, shape, and possesses unparalleled tensile strength. They've been hit by an asteroid without so much as a piece chipping off. An Arch ship needs less than a gram of cralium to store terabytes of data. Can you imagine how many Rubik's Cubes I could solve with that kind of brain? Because I bet if I had that kind of brain, I would be able to imagine exactly how many Rubik's Cubes I would be able to solve if I had that brain. Anyways, the Arch ships are the big boys in charge, running the show down below. The machines on the surface mine materials and then pack it into cargo ships, which get shot into the Arch ship, which turns them into solar panels, which launches them into space to provide energy for the system to keep going. Even the advanced machines are in endless nonsensical rat races that only serve to prolong themselves by another meaningless second in each iteration. When not in a current function, cralium acts as a standard model, gel-like machines that wait on standby to go with any task they are directed to. They change shape and function into, among other things, mining vessels, vibrating phalluses, and solar panels. One version is a scout, and they go out and, scout. So if you see them, you're fucked. Coming up on Earthwatch tonight at 11, everyone in politics is still sexually harassing and screaming over each other to see who gets to make the next bad decision, and I promise I'll finish the script when I'm sober. Greg, you are fired. The Teeming Universe, an extraterrestrial field guide. What would you do if you were dropped off in the water on an ocean planet surrounded by alien fish? Drown. The answer is you would drown. I know you've heard of a flying fish, but this is gonna take that to a whole new level. And how much money would it take to get you to use the alien fish as a fleshlight? Definitely at least enough to get plastic surgery to replace your dick. All this and more on In the Teeming Universe. Welcome to the world of Chriirah, a monumental ocean planet 7 times the mass of Earth. At the time of its discovery, it was the fattest inhabited planet they had ever found. It has a large ring of asteroids thought to be the remainder of moons that got shredded under the planet's intense gravity, and 8 unshredded yet perpetually terrified moons dispersed throughout the viscera of their past brethren. Aside from a handful of small islands, there is no land on Chriirah. 99% of the surface is covered in water, and hence 99% of the life on Chriirah is underwater. The surface is battered with constant hurricanes, and it's also prone to hypercanes. Hypercanes are, quote, ungodly storms that rage on for centuries that are fueled by an endless supply of warm water. The weather sometimes is almost as bad as Florida on Earth. Although there isn't much land on Chriirah, there are plant masses that create solid surfaces on the ocean for small invertebrates and flying animals to land, feed, and hump on. These heaven kelps stay anchored in place miles below the surface with a heavy cellulose lump. They're usually 1 to 2,000 meters from land to maximize nutrition from terrestrial runoff, and are rarely seen in the open ocean. These towering colonies of heaven kelp plant act as the anchor for the ecosystem. The amount of biodiversity in the ecosystem supported by the kelp rivals that of Earth's Amazon rainforest, and almost even of your big toe. There are 3 main zones of life in these areas: the pelagic zone, the bathypelagic zone, and the abyssopelagic zone. In the pelagic zone, photosynthetic organisms like the heaven kelp are the foundation for the food web. As you pass the pelagic zone, more and more creatures begin to develop bioluminescent or translucent skin, like deep-sea creatures such as Mark Zuckerberg. Go far enough down, and you'll hit the abyssopelagic zone. Yeah, we're talking deep-sea monstrosities for all the OGs here. Down here, the food web is based on chemotrophs that feed from hydrothermal vents, and detritus. It's pitch black, and because of this, most of the animals are a ghostly pale gray and often evolve other senses to replace the use of sight. They live slow-paced lives to conserve as much energy as possible. Swimming around all over the planet are the It's this. I'm sorry, Christian, I really can't read for shit. Or fish. They are trilaterally symmetrical fish like aliens. All fish come from a single trilateral ancestor, but some have adapted bilateral traits as well. They have hemocyanin in their blood, giving them a dark blue hue. They have a blind gut, meaning like Kim Jong-un, they lack an anus. Also like Kim Jong-un, they adapt the same system for expelling waste, and vomit up a hardened hamster pellet poo out their face hole. Speaking of face holes, they don't have true jaws, but instead fragments of bone connected to strong facial muscles. Obligatory BJ joke. They open their mouths up with a trio of bone or cartilage serrated hooks kept in place with muscles along the roof of their mouths. When the lips close over the mouths, these spines are hidden, but when the inner mouth flexes outwards, the muscles jut forward, taking the hooks with them. There are many different variations of this mouth for different diets. These are a specific family of fish, the Pelagonarians, aka the Pelegs. There are over 650 unique species of Pelegs, none of which are from Subnautica, so for God's sake, stop asking. All species have whisker-like protrusions on the front of their face used for locating food, communication, and courtship. They swim in schools ranging from a handful to tens of thousands. Their diet is mostly plant matter and sometimes smaller fish or invertebrates. Their skeleton is fish-like, but the key difference is that it's trilaterally symmetrical. They have a brain and nervous system and a set of electrical nodes under the skin which help the fish communicate with one another. They also have gills and a special set of lungs to let them take in oxygen from the water. Pelegs possess an internal cloaca for you know. When mating, both male and female cloacas move outwardly, and the male inserts the sperm directly into the female orifice. After that horrific description taken directly from the book, they lay their eggs in the clutches. This is the Galliant gull, a fish that has evolved the ability both to fly and swim. For instance, when you throw a regular fish off of a building, it would turn into a large red stain upon the inevitable impact of the ground. This would not happen with the Galliant gull. Because of their time spent on the surface, they have a very high tolerance for the bright sun, humid air, and mind-bending acid on the surface. The gull is largely endemic to the island of Talkoi, roosting on the cliffs before returning to the water to breathe. One of the largest invertebrate creatures native to Torreya is the anoom, large filter-feeding organisms made of many small jellyfish-like invertebrates. Full-grown anooms can reach 250 feet in length. They have a large sail, and behind that there are trailing tentacles that can be over 100 feet long. There are lots of other invertebrates too, some of which look pretty similar to what's on Earth. I've wanted to eat basically everything on this list, but none more than the tribble crab. The sun lily is special too, because it's a completely photosynthetic animal, unlike anything on Earth. I would also eat that thing too. Yeah.
Coming up on Earthwatch tonight at 11, the Americans are having a time where they're thankful that they were able to steal land hundreds of years ago, and are more toddlers than usual projected to get curb stomped this Black Friday.
The Teeming Universe, an extraterrestrial field guide. What would you do if you were dropped off on a freezing dry purple planet where nothing had less than 5 legs? Would I be able to use the handicapped parking here? This thing is just so cute as a baby. I'm gonna take it home like that lady with the pet chimpanzee, because what could possibly go wrong? And why hasn't internet historians sued me yet?
All this and more on In the Teeming Universe.
This is the world of Yaetu. Yaetu? It's a cold, dry, Earth-like planet towards the back end of its solar system's habitable range. From the surface, it resembles a drier, dustier, purpler version of Earth with a beige-colored atmosphere and purplish-blue oceans. It was significantly smaller than the human homeworld, and was made fun of for the scientists for being the smallest known habited planet at the time of its discovery. While this sounds mean, it's apparently really into degradation. It has high amounts of carbon dioxide in its atmosphere, allowing for a greenhouse effect to make the world warm enough to be habitable. Yaetu has a wet season and a dry season. During the wet season, the planet will warm up and some of the formerly frozen water will thaw, allowing the blackish-purple plant life to spread to areas that are not habitable during the dry season. During the dry season, the water freezes again and the forests recede back to their smaller dry season population. Around the same time, dust storms will cover entire parts of the planet for weeks. They also have an increase of forest fires at this time because of the deforestation and drier climate, plus static electricity from the friction between dust particles. The constant deforest and reforestation creates seasonally very active ecosystems. So imagine instead of a Starbucks pumpkin spice latte coming out every fall and then leaving in the winter, it's an entire ecosystem having a population boom orgy and then all dying in a frozen location, dehydration, population extermination till the next generation's migration in correlation with meteorological motivation. You know what they say, young, dumb, and full of cum to old, cold, and filled with mold. The highest areas of biodiversity are in the oceans or the dense forests. The temperate areas are home to animals that live there year-round rather than the other ecosystem's mass boink and die system. Plants on I-8 have chitin in their cells rather than cellulose, again like earth insects, and they have a black pigment to absorb maximum light instead of a green one. But even more alien are the chemoliths. Different from both plants and animals, they use chemosynthetic means to get energy. They can appear plant-like, but are more analogous to the fungi of Earth rather than the plants. Before anyone asks, no, yeah, we already tried, you can't trip on them. Animal life on I-8 are split into three main groups: vertebrates, invertebrates, and pseudovertebrates. The pseudovertebrates typically have 8 to 10 limbs and move using primarily hydraulic muscles. They have segmented armor along their hydroxyapatite spine. They're a very diverse group of life, with members as large as the cherry titan, a 25-foot grazing animal. Leave a comment on what you think its meat tastes like down below. Many of the vertebrates on I-8 share common characteristics as well. They have 3 eyes that can see in the visible or infrared spectrum. Many have ears and nostrils signifying similar systems and behavior to our own, but some amphibious variants breathe through their skin. All vertebrates on I-8 are pentapods because they evolved from a 5-limbed ancestor. There are a diverse plethora of different 5th limbs for niche purposes based on that species. Both vertebrates and pseudovertebrates have weird sideways facing mandibles like some bugs do. These vertebrate mammal-like apex predator aliens are the hellerines. At 5 feet from jaw to tail, they're around the size of a small human. They have thick fur, copious amounts of fat, and dense muscles to keep them warm when this ice rock drops to 20 below zero. This same dense muscle can allow for huge bursts in energy and incredible feats of physical performance. For example, a hellerine can run up to 45 miles per hour for up to 30 seconds. They have 1 forward-facing eye and 2 off slightly to the side, which gives them incredible depth perception. They can also detect prey's heat signatures using their infrared spectrum vision, which proves quite useful in hunting. Imagine ripping one and then getting murked because Bug-Faced Wolf over there detected your fart's heat signature. They have many different color variations of their fur that helps them camouflage in different environments. They almost entirely eat meat either through hunting or scavenging, but sometimes feed on the stomach contents of dead herbivorous prey. The hellerine have a bite force rivaling that of Earth's polar bears. They live in social groups of 10 to 20 individuals, and their favorite activity is working as a team to murder other creatures. Hellerine's social structure operates on a hierarchy with alpha, beta, subordinate, and baby roles. And extended family structures live in a den together. Hellerine give live birth. The babies are defenseless without their parents and rely on them for pre-digested nutrients that the mother or father vomits up out of the gizzard. Similar to pack hunting animals on Earth, they use a strategy when hunting to weed out the old, the young, the sick, or the stupid to get an easy meal. Like how when Petco liquefies the ugly animals to make food for the other animals, the cream of the crop rises to the top. Their 5th limb takes the place of a bony spear, which connects to the gizzard with the partially pre-digested rotten flesh in it. And then it injects this into the prey, poisoning it, killing it, consuming it, and digesting it to inject it into another one of the species members before vomiting the slurry back into its baby's face. Speaking of things that the hellerine like to poison with rotten flesh and then consume to turn into other rotten flesh to use to kill its entire family, this is the Crocian Sconyx.
Croissant.
This common herbivore can grow over 15 feet long. They have 4 long legs which they can use to gallop at up to 45 miles per hour, and a long muscular face with a wedge-shaped beak used for grinding up the tough foliage in their face hole. The 5th limb takes the form of a small prolonged horn on the front of its body used to defend from predators, fight rivaling mates, or engage in sexual knife play. They're usually pretty chill during the wet season, but much more aggressive when it comes to the dry season because of the scarcity of resources. I feel you, my dude. Fasting can be hard. I really can't adjust to having jerking off for dinner. This is the Ochre Sandpig, a mostly subterranean animal that only goes out on the surface to forage or look for other sandpig burrows. They're low-level pseudovertebrate predators in the plains ecosystem that hunt for things like skunk worms or the tashets. They have pretty bad eyesight because they live in the dark undergrounds, so they mostly navigate using these little 2 feely bingles on their head. At 3 feet long, it may look like the only defense they have is a segmented bony shell, but if scuttling away on its 10 comedically short legs doesn't work, it can roll itself up in a ball and projectile diarrhea, a harsh acidic chemical, at its attacker.
Coming up on Earthwatch tonight at 11, a morbidly obese man in a tight red suit is coming to break into your house through the ceiling and steal your food in exchange for colorful boxes. Unless you're Jewish or something, then you're safe, I guess.
The Teeming Universe, an extraterrestrial field guide. What would you do if you were dropped off on an alien planet filled with insectoid-esque creatures? I'm not 100% sure, but I think that mushroom tree over there just crapped out a bunch of caterpillars that all rapidly scuttled underground. And what in the hell is a fleshberry? Is it safe for me to use Gold Bod medicated foot powder on my penis? Oh, I can't hold it, burns!
Find out this time on In the Teeming Universe.
Welcome to the world of Ateria. It's 40% more massive than Earth with 20% more gravity. Oxygen on this planet is much lower than on Earth because the plants have dormant seasons. It has kind of a weirdly drastic elliptical orbit because it smashed into a protoplanet and absorbed it, like that child of the confused parents that were expecting twins and its brother that the parents had already named and emotionally attached to. Its orbit takes 4 human years to complete and swings very far away from the star for a 2-year winter, resulting in the planet becoming frozen. The plants have a shade of blood red or reddish purple to more easily warm themselves following the harsh winter. There are no true vertebrates on the entirety of Ateria, although some beings do have endoskeletons. I'm telling you, some people just never truly grow a spine.
The jokes are getting worse.
Members of the Arthrostrepophyllum instead using calcium phosphate or chitin shells like earth insects. They often have 4 eyes. I say often because that guy over there made a sacrifice to add to my collection. They're mesotherms, meaning they share traits of both warm and cold-blooded animals. While they look like insects, they have highly developed circulatory and respiratory systems. Also, above the forest, there are large jellyfish-like invertebrates that drag their tentacles along the forest for nutrients. I like tentacles. Not like that. This is the Fisher Crame, one of the smaller predators on the planet. Like human young, they are usually much fatter and wigglier in the larval stage. They have a metamorphic lifestyle, hatching into grubs in the early spring and reaching maturity by early summer. They have a 4-foot wingspan, and they're only 20 inches from tip to butt. They have 4 eyes, 2 for the visible spectrum and 2 for infrared. Fisher Crames display sexual dimorphism. Males are bigger and more red, and females are smaller and purplish. Crames have a third sex, one that has underdeveloped versions of both reproductive organs. When they reach the age of maturity, one set falls off and the crane cries hysterically because it fears it has undergone genital mutilation. Regardless of species, puberty is a stressful time. Another creature failed by the public school system. While it seems pretty alien, this is present in earth animals such as insects, certain fish species, and the common house cat. They have a brain and 3 smaller clusters of nervous tissue, but are not much smarter than common birds. Grubs feed on detritus and plant matter, and when they reach adulthood, they transition to a carnivorous diet. When it's time to boink, they fly into dense aerial clusters to have sky orgies, lay eggs, and then immediately die. For months afterwards, the rain is whitish and sticky. The hard-shelled eggs they lay are adapted for temperatures under 30 below zero, containing high levels of glycerin to keep them from freezing. And all claims that I am harvesting them in an unsustainable manner to make cheap car antifreeze is slanderous libel. This is the Blacktail Marshnoodle, runner-up for the best name ever. These common freshwater aquatic predators are not arthrostreptans, but instead in the phylum Vermillans. They have no exoskeleton, instead using an endoskeleton made out of cartilage. It has bad vision, so its 2 front legs evolved into probes to feel around and impale other creatures on its proboscis. Imagine this thing putting its entire proboscis up your urethra. It also uses electrical signals to find food. They can grow larger than a human male, and they reach maturity around 4 months out of the nymph stage, living for around 3 years before not going the way of the guy that I didn't hit with my car. This is the tripper hog. They have a thick brown shell which protects them and lets them camouflage, and a spade-shaped head used for digging. Like the common redditor, it spends most of its time browsing and eating. During the winter, they bury themselves alive and hibernate and then wake up. Unlike the average redditor, it mates at least once in its lifetime, sometimes every spring. Wait a minute, this thing is eat, sleep, fuck. So it's like a human, but without all the redundancies and cognitive dissonance. This thing is a sturg. Even though this kinda looks like a mushroom, you're dumb, because it's actually a tree. Sturgs exist across the entirety of the Aterian globe. They can grow up to 250 feet or 76 meters tall. Despite looking like trees, they have animalian traits as well. When they release pollen, their seedlings are more similar to caterpillars than seeds. Seedlings move around and will also develop bristles to avoid being eaten. They will crawl into a burrow where the sturg roots and begins to grow. Imagine instead of shooting loads, you jacked off into a field and all your sperms wiggled away into the night to find a hole to crawl in. They can live for up to 400 years and are home to numerous animals, like trees on Earth. Here's a sturg called the dwarf fleshberry sturg. I want to eat the fleshberry. Does a fleshberry taste like flesh?
Coming up on Earth Watch tonight at 11, the humans are celebrating New Year's by kissing each other while the balls drop or something. At least they don't do it before the balls drop, because that's definitely a crime and those are the first to die in prison.
The Teeming Universe, an extraterrestrial field guide. Imagine a world where everything had two skeletons and the trees grew like ocean coral. Would you let birds eat parasites off your back like the space rhino? Would you let me do it? What would you do if you had 4 eyes that could all swivel independently like a chameleon? I know it's something creepy. I can see it in your eyes. Let's just start the alien video, you pervert. Welcome to the world of Yulene, a small terrestrial planet slightly above half the size of Earth. Due to the small size, it only has 2/3 of the atmosphere density, which makes it much less effective at trapping heat, resulting in a colder environment. The surface is made up of large permanent ice caps, forests, and expansive oceans. There isn't much of an axial tilt, so there isn't much seasonality. Basically, most places on the planet are just one long harsh winter. For much of the planet's history, most of the surface has been covered in ice, save for some periods where the planet is warmed up, giving life opportunity to climb its ass out of the primordial soup that it would have stayed in having known there would be days like this. The planet's small size also results in a weaker magnetosphere, which has wide-reaching implications for life on the surface. Animal life on Yulene is at least aesthetically similar to Earth. There are invertebrates, which are pretty on par for Earth life, and vertebrates, which work a bit differently here. Vertebrates here are called basket vertebrates because they have 2 spines and skeletal frames. These 2 skeletons are linked by joints, muscle, or duct tape. Most vertebrate life on Yulene has this skeletal structure, but it's present in all land vertebrates due to an amphibian-like common ancestor. Many of these animals have a 3-part jaw system, the upper mandible separated in half vertically. Vertebrates typically have 4 eyes, all of which can see the visible spectrum, and some of which can sense the ultraviolet spectrum as well. This is the Lorian Clerics. Clarii, plural for clerics, are a clade of flying animals comparable to Earth's pterosaurs and birds. Many of them move and hunt with flight, but many species are also capable of other forms of movement like burrowing, running, jelking, hopping, or swimming. They are basket vertebrates, with some species developing anterior spines that can support large bird-like pectoral muscles. They sport long muscular necks that help them peer around when flying and nomming small animals. Their jaws have 2 small rows of serrated plates connected to the skull for snagging slippery fish boys. Some of the largest clarids have 40-foot wingspan, using their enormous wings to soar on mountain thermals for weeks at a time. Sounds like the back of a goddamn monster can. They don't have feathers, instead having a tightly pulled scrotum in each armpit like a bat. Living solitary lives, these creatures only pair up when it's time to fuck. This is the common cobbleback trait, one of the food sources of the clerics. It's kind of funny how a lot of creatures just exist as a food source. These are one of the most common aquatic creatures living in the streams and rivers. The adults resemble fish and measure up to 3 feet long. Every year, adults migrate north into the colder regions to avoid predation and lay their eggs. Their young kind of look like tadpoles, known on Earth colloquially as the common pond sperm. These are Cisabi, but I like to call it the space rhino. It's one of the largest grazers in the ecosystem. These creatures are armored titans measuring over 20 feet long, and they travel in herds of 30 to 40 across the cold wilderness. The armor on their backs is an extension of the dorsal spinal column. Cisabi graze on the various plants scattered about the tundra. They're usually pretty chill, unless it's horny season, and then they're not. The babies have shells that look like their heads on the ends of the pointy bits, which can allow them to confuse predators and escape to their parents. These thick shells are prone to parasites, which the Cisabi pecker will happily eat. There's always someone willing to eat insects off your back. Many plants here grow like earth coral, where it grows on top of its dead relatives. If you were one of these plants, you would grow out of the top of your parent's head, and your parent would be growing out of the top of your grandparent's head, who, if still alive, is permanently attached to their parent's decaying corpse. A good amount of the plants here are carnivorous. Some are moss-like plants filled with sticky slime that act like nature's glue traps for little critters. These are bragglebushes. Like some plants on Yulene, they can retract their extendy bits. The bragglebush likes to hide underground, like a puss. Welcome to the world of Menir. I'm kidding, this place is not welcoming. This how you keep your house, bro? No wonder you only reproduce asexually. I'm just blazing through these today. It's a cold hellhole super Earth with basically no magnetic field and a ton of UV radiation. Over 90% of the planet is covered in frozen ice and rock, but there is sparse liquid water on the surface. Even though there's no fossils because the surface is incredibly volatile, it's not impossible that a more complex ecosystem existed at one point. There are pools of both liquid water and hydrogen peroxide both on the surface and underground. Hydrogen peroxide is like that stuff that you put on your cuts and chicken fingers. There is no complex life on this planet, but instead only incredibly simple multicellular life in single-celled organisms. The hydrogen peroxide keeps the water just thawed enough for the ecosystem to exist. Imagine if your entire existence was on the brink of freezing to death. These are minerophiles, kind of like bacteria that live anywhere there's water. They're purple to reflect excess ultraviolet radiation and use hydrogen peroxide in their biology. Using an organelle called a peroxisome, they pump fresh peroxide into their bodies so they don't freeze. Let's go through the weird little critters, huh? These are the planolids. They're flat boys that usually just photosynthesize, but some like to eat other creatures. These are the gnathocylids. They usually just like to eat things with their wiggly cilia hair. Most relatable character of 2022. clue. These are Arcilia. They're wormy boys with hard, crunchy outer cells and a soft, creamy interior followed by an aftertaste of poisoning yourself with hydrogen peroxide. These are the Menirazomes, conglomerations of many smaller creatures making up a larger unit. These colonies can reach up to 20 meters and enjoy long floats in the ocean after a night out and soaking up aquatic nutrients. While it's unlikely without extensive global changes that life will get more complex, if the planet doesn't just get microwaved when its star hits the red giant phase, then maybe there's a chance the ecosystem could warm up enough to develop more complex life.
Coming up on Earthwatch tonight at 11, a child is walking down the streets lighting napkins on fire, sticking them in car gas tanks, and exploding them.
The Teeming Universe, an extraterrestrial field guide. Imagine a world post-scarcity, post-hunger, post-poverty. Now imagine that same world was inhabited by a bunch of six-limbed, four-eyed, carnivorous bird people that had a government run off feudalism. Now imagine those same feudalistic, carnivorous bird people colonized another planet with bipedal, one-eyed, insectoid giraffe aliens wandering around on the surface, and then took it even further, establishing colonies across 10 star systems. Now imagine that after they met you, they were still convinced that their species was the only example of intelligence in the universe. What if I told you they were right? What the hell am I going on about this time? Stay tuned to find out right now. Welcome to the world of Tevati, the largest moon orbiting the planet Theta, a planet between the mass of Saturn and Uranus. Despite being a moon, it's incredibly Earth-like. It has 70% the gravity of Earth and a weaker magnetic field. It's also warmer, has higher oxygen, and no ice caps. The large planet it orbits will block out the sun on average every 21 days for about 50 hours. During these times, the temperature will drop considerably, and many species sleep through it or go into complete and total breakdown for fear that the sun will never come back. Tevati is prone to asteroid impacts due to Theta's high gravity, and around 4 million years ago, one of these strikes wiped out 75% of life. It now exists in the late stages of recovery. Tevati isn't just any world, it's an alien colony belonging to the Yaetu. They come from Yaetu, but we'll get to that in a sec. Around 850 years ago, over 2 million Yaetu colonists arrived on a massive superstructure to Tevati. Presently, this moon is home to about 40 million of these aliens.
Well, technically, to me, you're the alien.
They live in cities floating hundreds of feet above the ground, providing everything a bustling society would need. Life evolved independently from each other on both worlds, and there are fundamental differences in biology that make Tevati life toxic to consume for Yaetuans. They don't walk on the surface in normal clothes or eat any of the aliens because they got arsenic in them, which makes them deadly.
You're missing out, dude.
This also applies to drinking unfiltered air and breathing unfiltered water. Life on this planet usually has an exoskeleton for support, and sometimes an endoskeleton as well. Creatures here never evolved to be warm-blooded because the moon is quite warm. They don't have lungs, instead using dorsal sails that lead to a system of trachea like Earth insects and squirrels. These sails also regulate body temperature. They have one large eye that senses light in the visible spectrum. Exoskeletal organisms feed using an internal muscular mouth which they can reach outside of their endoskeleton. I know I'm a broken record, but dude, how can you not ad-lib a rim job joke here? The majority of life on this planet evolved from the more humble survivors of the extinction. Like how a couple 100 million years ago you were just some weird rat thing. And look at you now, you're some weird rat thing that found a smartphone. These are Tevats, massive descendants of minuscule extinction survivors. Nearly twice as tall as an earth giraffe, these animals can reach up to 30 feet in height. Like a human post-wood chipper accident, they have 3 limbs, walking on 2 legs and using a third double-jointed arm to pick leaves off the trees to shove into their jawless mouth. They masticate the plant matter using bands of tooth-lined muscle. Tevats have one large eye surrounded by long hairs which are like eyelashes for humans. They also have a thick outer shell and a large sail. This shell helps protect the adults, but babies are more vulnerable before it fully develops. Tevats also have ankle sails used in courtship. If you were a Tevat, to gain the attention of a mate, you would suggestively wiggle your sexy feet skin flaps. And I'm gonna stop talking now. When it's time for sexy times, the males will separate into a bachelor herd and start kicking the literal shit out of each other while the females watch, and when there are a handful of males deemed dominant, they will mate. I think that humans have this too, it's called like football. To mate, they crouch face to face and the male's genitals will pop out from under the mouth hole and go into the female's genitals. 6 to 8 weeks later, the egg is released from the female's anus and pops on contact with the ground like a disgusting Orby.
A baby is born.
They stick close to their mothers and they can run almost immediately after being shat out. Their name comes from how they like to wander long distances to find water holes. Teva in Yaetuan means wanderer. This is the plain claw, a common mid-sized predator
predator that is a major threat to infant tevats. Like wolves, they live in small groups and have a group dedicated to having sex while cosplaying as them. They're supported by an endoskeleton, but also have a small thin shell that's basically vestigial. They have legs and are capable of running bipedally or tripedally. For hunting, they have a flexible eye stalk and specially adapted eyes for maximum depth perception. This is the prickleback. Angry pinecone is covered in spines to prevent predation. It feeds on nests of small invertebrate creatures. I don't know how this fucking thing moves either, but it manages. They have trouble locating nests on their own due to fucking look at them, but their more agile friend, the blue flyer, locates nests for them and then leads them right to it. After the prickleback eats all the little critters while the flyer watches statistically, the blue flyer slurps up the nectar exposed from destroying the nest and all the generations of creatures. Now that we gotta look at a Yaetuan colony, it's time to look at Yeet's homeworld, Yaetu. Many vertebrates here have 6 limbs and tendril-like ears that specialize for a variety of purposes. Intelligent life like that on Yaetu is rare. In fact, Earth and Yaetu are the only known worlds with intelligent life for thousands of light years. It's 80% more massive than Earth, but despite that, the worlds have similar physical properties. Yaetuans have developed sentience. Their society developed from hunter-gatherers to sedentary agriculture to the advent of civilization. Around 4,000 years ago, the environment was about to collapse due to neglect and overexploitation, and for this reason they began to colonize the galaxy as their homeworld healed. Jumping forward, Yaetu is now bustling and dotted with large cities, and the species has expanded across the galaxy, diversifying greatly. All parts of the advanced civilization that damage the world, like agriculture and mining, are done off-world to minimize damage. They have technology far more advanced than that of humanity, and perhaps even the Krail. The Yaetuan Empire is a Type 2 civilization, which means they maintain control across multiple star systems. For context, your species is a high-level 0 civilization, which means many of you still struggle with working someone else's shower. They can go faster than light and create massive complex machinery, like Dyson swarms, population ships, and things we can't even fathom. The Yaetuan Empire consists of colonies over 10 star systems that kinda act like states, having their own government but communicating with the homeworld. Yaetuan society is considered to be post-scarcity, with poverty being virtually a thing of the past. Yaetu actually functions in a feudalist fashion. I know that sounds bad, but this pamphlet I found on the ground says it's not. This results in very little class mobility, but everybody is so comfortable because of the advanced technology and sustainable systems that they don't really give a shit. Plants here are similar to that of Earth, except they have a bright blue color. These are the Yaetuan. The Yaetuan have an average intellect far above that of a human being. They use their back 4 legs to walk upright while using their other 2 for manipulation of the environment. Their ancestors used to walk on all 6 like a scrambling little beetle. Yaetuan have 6-fingers hands with 2 opposable thumbs. They stand around 4 to 5 feet in height, have an oval-shaped head, much of which is devoted to their brain, and 2 sets of forward-facing eyes as well as a beak. There are many different variations of Yaetuan stemming from the colony environments and subsequent microevolution that they spurred, and they are not offensive to one another in any way, shape, or form because I wouldn't avoid controversial topics for reasons that don't concern you. Their ear tendrils move in tandem with their vocalizations to display very complex verbal and nonverbal language. While it might sound harsh to human ears as a series of trills and clicks of the teeth, have you ever heard the shriek of a human child? Like humanity, their speech has many different languages and dialects. Even after meeting humans, they still don't believe in another intelligent species existing in the universe. Absolutely savage, but they're not wrong. They have a complex culture that centers on cooperation, preservation, and strong community bonds. Almost like a cross between an ant colony and humans, they are a lot less individualistic than humanity, but still maintain a sense of self. This strong sense of community, along with a community-dependent psychology, allows for the feudalist structure to be a lot less murdery than when humans did it. Despite not believing in any other intelligent beings other than themselves, they do hold beliefs in ethereal, abstract, cosmic beings. They have a different understanding of time than us, thinking both to be cyclical and linear in nature. One can see the influence of their culture and psychology in their artwork. This is the Wetim. It's kinda like a Yaetuan dog. Like Earth doggos, they will fornicate with your leg on sight if you do not establish dominance. Domesticated around 400,000 years ago, wild variants of these animals are still pack-hunting creatures. They have 4 large eyes and sharp-toothed beaks. They walk on all 6s and can run up to 30 miles per hour. Some species have claws that can be over a foot in length. This is a waltif, a flying pollinator and cultural staple food for the Yaetuan. Like humans do with pigs, they keep them both around for company and eat them as food. Many apartments have artificial waltif nests that are used as a food source. I was actually very graciously invited to a dinner at a Yaetuan home, and was slightly surprised when they pulled a live animal out from the window, bashed it to death on the kitchen counter, and then threw its still bleeding body directly into the oven. I love traveling because you just learn so much about other cultures. Now let's go to our Yaetuan correspondent, Yeet.
Thanks, Az. I have no idea why we hired you to make this. We were asking for an actual footage full-length nature documentary, and instead you took our money and gave us a cartoon series where you watched aliens fuck and then ate them, and you did that to basically everyone that you saw. We will see you in court. Coming up on Earthwatch tonight at 11, now that Valentine's Day is over, pregnancies and suicides are given a break from peak season until, of course, spring break. Back to you, Az.
All today's an alternative paleontology. How would you interpret the skeleton of a giant creature that you've never seen before? Would it be harder to be accurate if the creature was formerly obese? Do hummingbirds harbor a dark secret that links them to the Cabal? And what the hell is this thing? Stay tuned to find out on In the Shrink Wrap. All Today's is a section from the book All Yesterdays created by C.M. Kozman, Darren Nash, and John Conway. The section is written from the perspective of imaginary future scientists who are trying to interpret the animals that we live around today. You see, no one was around back in the days of when ancient animals were vibing, which means that some of the assumptions we make about these animals are entirely wrong, some in very comedic ways. Following this theme, this literature explores how a scientist from a species far in the future would reconstruct animals we live around using only their bones as a guide. It shows the potential for scientific mistakes in an entertaining and educational manner. One of the most comical real-life examples of this is Homo diluvi. This creature may not be realistic or even feasible in any sense of the word, but it's so weird that I had to give it the starting spot. It was a giant salamander skeleton that was thought to belong to a humanoid being. This thing is so incredibly misinterpreted that even an infant whose soft spot has been modified for use as a cereal bowl could see this thing is not a bipedal human. It was discovered by one Swiss scholar, Johann I don't know, man. Saying that's a human and then calling yourself a scholar is a bit like drinking a beer at an AA meeting. Something don't add up. Yo, real quick, reading directly from a Wikipedia article I got after Googling Homo diluvi. In his book, Lithographia Helvetica from 1726, Johann Jacob described the Miocene fossil dug up in as Homo diluvi testes, believing it to be the remains of a human that got drowned in the biblical deluge. The fossil was about 1 meter 3 feet long, lacked its tail and hind legs, and thus could be interpreted as showing some resemblance to the remains of a violently trampled human child. The scientist interpreted hummingbirds as blood-sucking parasites. Their beak could easily be seen as something to pierce an animal's hide, like a hypodermic needle. Their skeletal anatomy suggests that they could cling to the bellies of large terrestrial creatures with their little foot claws and use their beaks like vampires to suction out the life juices. This hypothetical hummingbird may also use their face spikes to pierce eggshells and lap up the nutritious fluids inside. From the bones of baboons, they've recreated this leathery, wrinkled terrestrial predator that gives me major satyriac vibes. A far cry from the bright, colorful, flabbily butted creatures that we live amongst today. The fangs of baboons are lined with grooves that are usually signifiers for if the animal is venomous. They also have a complicated sinus structure that could be misinterpreted as the locations for venom glands. Because of this, the scientists think that the baboon would track its prey before sealing the deal with an envenomated nail in the coffin. One of the most common mistakes paleontologists make when reconstructing animals has been affectionately named shrink wrapping. Oftentimes, when people only have bones to go off of, they will reconstruct the creature, highlighting the bony ridges in its body, almost like they took a skin and literally wrapped it around a skeleton. Without the guides of the animal's fleshy bits, it's very easy to create an incredibly inaccurate representation of the beast you're trying to recreate. So basically, it's like when you get a trash bag and a vacuum cleaner and it vacuum seals you and some people get off to it, but instead of a creepy man in a hefty plastic bag, it's an animal skeleton very tightly encased in its own skin. For example, this is a flawed representation of a common house cat. You can see here that it's undergone a form of shrink wrapping with a clear skull shape to its head. This shrink-wrapped fingerboy monstrosity is apparently a spider monkey. The scientist misattributed the skeleton to be an arboreal predatory species of human. They have long bony fingers with curved talons on the ends, theorized for used in fishing the intestines out of a poor small rodent's rectum. Well, the book didn't theorize that, but I just did, and now it's in your brain and there's nothing you can do about it. The mouth has the same fangs as a regular spider monkey would, but because they portrayed it with a skin tighter than a Botox addict, They looked much bigger as a result. Take a quick guess what this wasteland horse of the apocalypse is. Unless you've read the book, you probably won't be guessing zebra. Every identifiable characteristic about the zebra is absent because every identifiable characteristic about the zebra was apparently only skin deep. There's a lesson in there somewhere about not being shallow. Nah, just goofing. This is nature. The only lesson here is don't be food. Since hooves aren't bone, they weren't preserved as well as the rest of the skeleton. So scientists had to do some guesswork, and they guessed wrong and gave it one long, horrifying, wiggly toe on each foot. This thing that looks like a goose that I hit with a flamethrower is a swan. Instead of the waterfowl we know from those hilarious YouTube channels of them attacking children, they were represented as a bare, wrinkly-skinned, nightmarish creature with talons used to skewer their prey alive and slurp it off their knife hand like an hors d'oeuvre while it slowly loses consciousness. In the same vein as the swan is what was supposed to be a hornbill. Instead of the bright plumage we're used to, these things look like a chicken that's been processed for cooking with a sea snail stapled to its head. Some is very clear when one looks at their representation of whales. A sperm whale was thought to look like the aquatic dinosaurs of the past. This makes me wonder if the paleontologists who interpreted marine dinosaurs are just editing their fossil Instagram photos to make them look skinnier. They turned the bowhead whale into a serpentine gulper eel looking body with a big old mouth for swallowing big old prey items. That may look ridiculously off base from the animal we know today, but look at this thing's body and then look at this thing's skeleton. Honest to God, it does kind of look like a snake creature from its bones. Another large animal that had elaborate structures made from soft tissue that these scientists will never know about is the elephant. They saw the skull and didn't immediately think trunk. They gave it a weird fleshy face sack for fleshy face sack related activities. While you can cockily lie in the comments and say that you'd think of it, even if you would you really be confident that the other scientists wouldn't laugh you out of the room if you claim that thing has a dick on its face? This is how they would interpret a rhinoceros. Very clearly, it's missing its horn. Despite how very funny I would be for saying horny and bone in the same sentence, the rhino horn is actually made out of keratin, so it would not be preserved for as long as the calcium-enriched body support sticks. Instead, these scientists have observed the anatomy of its back and decided that it had a large sail-like protrusion coming out of it like a Spinosaurus. I don't know why they think this, but it looks cool, so now I believe rhinos look like this. They theorized that this flappy doodle would be used to regulate body heat. Nah, I'm just kidding, that's a regular old land shark, but I had you though, didn't I? This is supposed to be a cow. It was represented as a light and dainty, fast-moving creature. To any human being that has ever seen a cow, this is not what they look like. They're either jacked to all hell, or look like they survive entirely on the McDonald's that they will soon be turned into. If you ever see a skinny cow, it's likely very sick. Without all the muscle/obesity that would be rotted away with time, there's no way a scientist would know how bulky these animals would be. So with only a skeleton to guess from, this isn't that bad of a reconstruction. This is a recreation of a toad. It walks instead of the hopping motion that we know that toads do. Don't worry, they realized their mistake because they saw the structure of the legs is different than most quadrupeds. To rectify their mistake, they then said it stood upright, signaling that the entirety of the frog and toad literature is canon in all today's erroneous speculative evolution universe. So close, but yet so far. This is what they made when they saw an iguana skeleton. Basically a rat iguana, and that's it, but pretty cool, right? If iguanas were mammals, they'd probably cause a serious problem specifically just in Florida, because they're super invasive in Florida. With all the ecosystem damage of an invasive species and all the rabies from a regular raccoon, this thing would be the ultimate double threat. When they saw a snake skeleton, they thought to themselves, well, we've never seen a reptile without legs. We're damn sure not gonna start today. To avoid seeing something without legs, they made a reptile wiener dog and assumed that the legs weren't fossilized properly. This may sound like a stupid mistake, but it's kind of commonplace for paleontologists to assume that not every piece of a fossil is intact. So this is definitely a mistake that we're already making in real life and just don't know it. This goofy looking dude is what they thought a manatee was. It takes on the same form we'd see from buffaloes. They only found the skull, so why wouldn't it be on land? They don't have any evidence otherwise. I would love it if we farmed these things instead of cows. But if that was the case, I would be saying the opposite, because I only want it because it's weird and I'm bored. Speaking of incorrectly classifying water species, this is what they reconstructed after finding a hippopotamus skull. It shows a monster-fied version of the original vegetarian creature we know today. We associate things like strong jaws and large teeth with predators, but in relying on this, we can make the mistake of mislabeling creatures. The scientists thought that this creature was capable of chewing through the metal of cars, which they can't do that, right? right?
This is the Vulture, and I had to record it from the bathroom because I'm a fucking idiot and didn't record it when I had time. You got a problem with it? Take it up with the bots, because apparently their ADHD is worse than a squirrel's, and I don't have time to record it correctly before they dropkick my content under the fridge. It looks kind of like a penguin mixed with a pterodactyl. Instead of the traditional bird wing structure, they attached it in both the arms and the thighs like a typical flying dinosaur. Arm scrotum rating 6 out of 10.